Hello everyone, my name is Viktor Smirnov, I'm team lead at Positive Technologies, and today I would like to tell you about development of our languages and our grammars using and trying to solve problems we did last year.
Сначала про контекст задачи.
A few words about the context. We develop a meta product, Max Patrol O2. We have a lot of expert data, and this expert data contains everything needed for the work of the product, including the object models, which we use for our service, for our product. And this expert data, developed separately from the application code, and not only they are big in volume, they are quite large and complex, but also they can change very drastically and randomly without any ties to the application code. So our task was to provide filtration mechanism or looking for subsets of objects in the general set of objects. We had to give a user an option to separate specific subsets, and to do so using different fields, and also use additional data which are not present in the objects themselves. The reason for that is that sometimes we do not have complete data, and we need additional data from a different system to complete this data. What kind of approaches could be used here? First of all, we could have fixed criteria. It is possible to use dynamic generation for user interface. And finally, the approach we selected, creating your own query language. This language will be later used by the end user to select specific subsets. Fixed criteria is this approach where at the design stage you select specific fields where you give an opportunity to search and filter. The pluses of this kind of approach is that it's very simple, it's very basic. You pre-selected specific fields, you write the code and it goes okay. The problem is lack of flexibility. If you need to look for a different field or filter using a different field, you would have to change the code of the whole application. It's better to use this kind of approach when the data model is stable, it's static, or it doesn't change very often. And an example would be working with a client database where we can formulate that we want to query or filter through name, surname, maybe date of birth. But if we want to use a individual taxpayer number, we would have to change the code. Next point, creating a generator which would allow to make it possible for the user to have a more flexible approach. And is based on the data description. The plus is that it will be comfortable for the end user. It's a pretty good UX, pretty good user design and user experience. The problem is that it's very complex, it takes a lot of time for development and testing. And probably it would require additional entities, like front-end scheme, based on which it will work with different preventive types of data like enumeration and so on. They probably will work with validation schemes, and those will be different from front-end and back-end. So this kind of approach is better suited when there is a need to have very useful, very comfortable, flexible interface, and when you have time and money resources. And I must say that we used this approach a few years ago. We've achieved the result, but it was actually pretty complex and time-consuming. And finally, the approach which we selected for our problem, creating our own language, our own query language. The plus is that this query language does not depend on the data model. So when you change this model, you don't have to change anything in the code. And it's pretty simple, laconic interface. You can use the text to operate it. And this interface can be pretty comfortable. You can add highlights and autocomplete. The problems with this approach is that you need competence and you need skills in the development team to create grammar and work with this grammar. And users have to study this query language before they can use this in their work. So as a result, we should use this approach when there is a constantly changing data model, and when we do not just orient on some person on the internet, we make it for a technical specialist who can learn an additional programming language, or at least query language. We also considered quality attributes like modifiability, clearness, and potential for education. We wanted to modify this model, and we wanted this application to work well with changes. When we say about how clear, the second point was if it was clear for the end user so that they would not have any problems with this. Since we are building this for the end user and we consider this will be a technical expert, they do understand most things about query language and they should not have any problems. And similar thing for the point 3, how easy is it to get in there so that it will not be too problematic, so that we will not have 6 months courses to study and learn our language. Since our query language was very similar to a simple SQL query language, this is what we wanted to get. To implement the solution, we decided to use a ready-made solution, NTLR. NTLR is another tool for language recognition as a generator, downward analyzers for formal languages. But simply speaking, it can do a lot of routine work based on the grammar. For example, it can create a code of lexer and parser, and they would analyze and process input data and then transfer them and change their format into a more suitable format. Other capabilities include that NTLR supports 10 programming languages as target languages. So if you work in any of these languages, C++, Dart, Java, Python, Go, the NTLR is suitable for you. It also has a free license for BSD. You can use this in your projects, including commercial projects too. NTLR exists for a pretty long time, and it has useful tooling, including plugins for development. For example, Rubber has a plugin that makes it possible to visualize some kind of input expression using your grammar as a syntax tree. As I said, NTLR has been there for years. It has been tested and used in many different products, like in Groovy, Jython, Hibernate, Apache Cassandra, MySQL Workbench, and many more. When we were trying to solve this problem, creating our own query language, we referred to different literature, reports, documentation, but truth be told, they have snippets of information, of useful information, and we were not able to find a specific guide how to start, how to create a working application from scratch. And that is why we wanted to give this presentation, provide a step-by-step guide on how it should work and how it works in the end. And this is what we covered in the next part of the presentation. So, grammar is a set of rules for our language as a number of different rules for lexer and parser. Lexer takes in data as a string and changes into a number of tokens which are passed into parser. Parser takes these tokens and creates a syntax tree. It is this kind of a tree which consists of operators and operands. For example, a simple expression, A equals B, can be considered as 3 nodes tree, which will have A equality sign as the A, and A and B would be its nodes on left and right. Any language starts with the requirements to the language. We had these requirements. We had to specify the object type for the subsets. We had to be able to compare the values of constants of our objects with the specified constants, and we needed to compare object fields. They needed to support strings and integer constants, also support brackets, and support operators like AND or OR for multiple conditions. These are the requirements. Now, what do we do when we write the grammar itself? The first construction is, it says that we do not really care about spaces, tabulation, and we ignore all this. Then we start to transform our input data. For its further use, we transform it into tokens. And here is how we describe this ANTLR as capital letters of English alphabet or Latin alphabet. Then we can create 2 operators from this AND OR. Besides that, we need letters, digits, numbers, names, which can be compound using dots inside of them. And we also have tokens for parentheses or brackets. Besides that, we need some keywords, which will be defined by special symbols. Each keyword will start with a special symbol. And we will also need strings in single and double quotation marks. Then we need an operators for comparison, symbol of minus, and we will consider Boolean operator as AND or OR. Keywords are put like this. They start with a special symbol, and then they have some kind of name. This is what we have for strings and for integers. And finally, the most interesting part is the description of our entry filter. This is a complex description. It has 5 different options, and we'll go from top to bottom. The first line allows us to record our filter as the comparison of some object field with a constant. The second line allows us to compare object fields with an additional data through the keyword. Third line describes a property of an object which we want to separate in the subset. And finally, we use the recursive filter. We use the filter in the brackets and 2 filters with a single Boolean operator. We have this recursive filter because of 2 last lines, and because of that, we can create simple or complex constructions with our conditions.
Before we start using what we have, we need to do a validation. Because we set up filter as text, and there can be logical errors or even some typos. With the first stage, with the correction test, you can use ANTLR, you can use errorless lexer and parser. You enter text, and infrastructure will collect all the errors that were detected, and then you can notify the user that something went wrong. Then after that stage, we know that formally our filter is properly written, but it's not enough, because also there is a number of business rules that we need to check too. We have a certain model of data. There is a number of objects, but the user doesn't know anything about a particular model besides it can change. That's why we need to check that whether this type of data is in the model, and we also need to check that you can see the fields of the object in the model and that this type of data actually has it. And also there is a couple of dozens of such rules that we need to check. For such checks, we need to see that our app is already turned into syntax tree. So that's why we can write our own validator that use pattern visitor, go around the tree, go and see what we want to see and check what we want to check. Let's look at the examples of filters in the language that we looked at before. In order to set any subset, we need to use one or two filters. Here you can see on the screen. First filter, this filter by fields of the object. We have a type of object, and we need that for any subset for our business task. The second filter for additional data, it can be there or not. If we have enough data on the object, then we don't need the second filter. Then look at the elements that each filter consists of and how they fit what we saw in our grammar. The first word is a keyword, is type of object. It's fixed and it's indicated with the @ sign. Then the second keyword starts with a $sign. This is the indication of the source of additional data that we'd like to refer to, and they can be different. And the main thing is, this is the special symbol. Then comparison operators that we described in grammar, parentheses, and or Boolean operators, constants, everything that we described in the grammar. So you can see everything. These are the lines without quote marks, and this is the fields of the object that we would like to compare things with. So after the special symbols, after the dot, these are the additional field data, and each data source can have its own number of fields. So we looked at the filters. So now, how are we going to use syntax trees that we build from them? All data we have is in a relation database, and we would like to turn it into and to execute it and get this number of objects that will fit all the criteria of the filters that we set up. Let's look at the filters that we know and the result that we're going to get from them. The first part of the query is always the same, because we refer to the same table and we get the identifiers of the objects. The second part, this is section V, and it's built on the first query by the type of the object and the fields of it. This is how you match the part of SQL query in section V. Then there are typical sections. They're comparing the fields with the constants. Data is in a base, in a digital format, and you can refer to this using these syntaxes. The second filter, if we have it, is transformed into join section. And from interesting part, this is this line where we get all text from the filter up to the special symbol, and we use it as an additional filtration for the additional content. So all the sources, where all the sources of additional data are stored. And this is how we properly refer to what we want. Then a similar section and comparison of fields of the objects with additional data. We see this construct with parentheses for the priority of the operation, and it consists of two filters. After making this inquiry in the database, we get the result that we wanted to receive initially, the list of identifiers of the objects that we have filtered, and we made them a subset.
Не обязательно, конечно же, преобразовывать.
And it's not necessary to convert syntax trees into a query. It's just one of the realizations that we chose. What other ways of using it can be? For example, if you use a sourcing approach, then right on the flow of events, if you don't have
применять наши синтаксические деревья и выносить какое-то.
You have enough information for our analysis, and you apply syntax trees. And then you decide whether to bring object to a certain subset or not. Then you can also use several data storages, relation databases or not. You just need to realize the syntax tree as an inquiry to certain storage.
Я хотел рассказать о результатах, которые мы получили.
Here I would like to tell you a little bit about the results that we got after solving this problem. The first is the complexity of development was actually higher than we expected, a typical one. But frankly, we didn't really have many issues with this, except for a problem with some visual guide that would help user. So if you never wrote your own language, so don't be afraid of it. So it's pretty much doable. With the time of development, it was okay. We managed to stay within the deadlines, and this new development we didn't really have any problem with that. And the last 2 points of using our solution in the ready-to-go product, we didn't identify any technical issues. All works properly. Filters are created and subset are identified. Impressions of the users, feedback from the users, it's all okay. They can set up filters. We didn't have any negative feedback from them. And at the end, a couple of tips. Those of you who are just touching the grounds here, when you develop your own language, so kind of check with the languages that already exist. So people write languages for many years, and query languages too. So it's better to use the experience that's been gained over the years. And if you'd like to come up with some sort of esoteric language, of course you can do that. But think first, because in white space, to create some necessary things, I wouldn't say that's really enjoyable. And also keep in mind your target audience. If you know that people know SQL and language and they've used it often and they keep in mind some functional languages, you need to DSL for them, so keep that in mind. So don't frustrate the end user, in other words. And also think about possibility to expand, because the requirements will change That's just a given.
Это закладывать изначально.
And you need to
На этом у меня.
initially keep that in mind. So with this, I'm done. If you liked the presentation, you can vote for it using QR code. And I'm ready to answer your questions, the questions that were asked to bots.
Мы продолжаем принимать, пожалуйста.
We continue receiving your questions, so please vote and send your questions to chatbot. So what questions we received? Yes, we have questions. Okay, I'll ask them.
Первый вопрос.
First question.
Imrek-Q.
Imrek Q asks,
при использовании своего языка запроса.
whether attack vectors exist when you use your language of inquiry.
Я хорошо, наверное, не отвечу, потому что я не
I
безопасник.
probably won't be able to properly answer that because I'm not a security guy. I'm a developer, so therefore thank you for the question, but I sadly can't answer it.
Тут, наверное, имеет смысл учитывать тот фреймворк,
Maybe you need to keep in mind the framework
который вы используете, да, то есть тот
that you use,
и посмотреть на его управляющую конструкцию,
the
то есть как минимум
target language that you use, and to look at its control construct.
как-то передаете
So this is the vector. So if there are lines and there are some symbols
язык, то есть как минимум вот этот вектор атаки есть.
that are transferred, maybe you have interpretable language, so at least those vectors of attack exist.
В продолжение тот же самый.
Continuing with this, the same,
Как вы обеспечиваете обратную совместимость своего языка?
how you ensure the reverse compatibility of your language when it expands.
Этого пока не приходилось. У нас такая
Well,
задача,
actually,
где
I
базовые
didn't have a chance to
стандарты
expand it.
бывают.
So with the task that we worked on, the basic scenario kind of covers
Не
it.
такой задачи мы, скорее всего,
But when we'll have a task like that, so we will be writing migration of the existing filters and we'll be putting them on new grammar. So if it is impossible, they would notify the user that we need to improve the existing filters with the new capabilities of the language if something went wrong.
Прозрачно для пользователей происходит.
So in other words, it's pretty transparent for the user. Some additional actions on the user side, they don't need that, right? So you can just provide for that. Yes.
Для каких
Alexei
задач
Vasilchuk
вы
asks,
используете разработанный язык
for what
запроса?
tasks you use the language you developed?
Для выделения подмножеств. То есть у нас есть
To
большое количество объектов
highlight subsets.
информационной безопасности.
There are many objects in the system that have to do with information security, and they represent some elements in the infrastructure of the client. And for the client, it's important to highlight some subsets of particularly important objects. For example, something that is relating to production servers. And with this language, we allow the client to describe that subset of infrastructure that the client is interested in. And then we use this data in our product.
Тот же
Thank you.
слушатель, Алексей Васильчук.
The same.
Сколько
Viewer,
по времени
Alexei
заняла
Vasilchuk.
разработка?
How long did the development take?
Разработка вместе с тестированием заняла.
The development, together with testing, took,
Меняет месяц.
if I'm not mistaken, about 2 months or 2 months and a half. I think from scratch to the result.
Следующий вопрос от слушателя L. Почему был выбран
Viewer L,
NTLR, а не, например,
why did you choose NTLR? Why not Flex?
Да, про аналоги мы тоже в курсе.
Well,
У нас
about similar
в компании
systems, yes, we know.
была определенная
In our company and other departments, we had some expertise among the specialists. They knew
одна из главных.
NTLR, and that's probably the main reason why we chose NTLR.
Спасибо. Так, ну, давайте я слушателей буду других тоже добавлять. Антон
Okay.
Золотухин.
Other viewers, Anton Zolotuhin.
Язык запросов, если
Why do you need another query language if you have PGQL?
PDQL много не бывает.
PGQL,
Шутка такая.
those things can be too many.
Сколько там? 3, 4, да.
That's just an inside joke. So this is mini PGQL.
Понятно, спасибо. Так, Тимур Черных. Вот несколько
Another
вопросов.
viewer, Timur Chernych, a couple of questions. First one.
Сталкиваться с проблемой неоднозначных
Did you
грамматических
have a chance
конструкций? Если
to
да, то как вы с
encounter
ними боролись?
the problem of
Не приходилось сталкиваться, но у нас...
multi-meaning language constructs? But see, we didn't have such a complex
Ну, кстати,
grammar for this task. And by the way, there are means for that. There are tools for that.
Ваш язык
The
запроса
second part of the
очень
question,
похож
your query language
на KQL.
is very simple to KQL.
Готовые парсеры, которые можно было
Did you
просто
look
просто
at the ready-made parsers and you could just take and kind of improve or optimize? No, we didn't look at them.
Там строгий набор требований, причем
We had a pretty strict list of requirements, and it wasn't big, and we decided not to bring any new product.
Вот, кстати, следующий вопрос
By the way, the next question
слушателя про overhead overkill.
about overhead and overkill. Sergey Shaman, don't you feel that MTLR,
не
this is
относится
overhead?
получившегося языка к L?
Grammar of the language you made could be related to LL1.
Здесь, может быть, это и был оверкилл, но мы
Maybe it was overkill,
возможности дальнейшего
but
расширения.
we also looked at possibilities of further expansion,
Именно
and we thought
достаточно объемные, да, но поддерживающие
that it
более
could
сложные
be
грамматики
quite bulky,
в
but
перспективе NTLR.
we may need NTLR as a
Следующий
prospect.
вопрос от слушателя. Антон, рассматривали ли граф QL
Next
для этой
question.
задачи?
Did you look at graphs for this task? No.
Понятно. Александр Слепнев. После
Next question, Alexander Slipnev. After implementing new language and collecting stats of using it by clients, can you introduce some optimization to filters in order to increase performance? Did you have any experience like that as a result of the year? So optimize performance, no, we didn't do that yet. There were no such queries yet.
Запрос
But
появится, то
if such a query
с
comes,
этим работать, скорее всего, уже после
then we'll work with it.
запроса еще,
And after
скажем, визитор напишем, который будет ходить по
SQL
запросу,
query
смотреть,
will
что
write some visitor that will be walking through this query, and we'll see what else could be optimized.
Следующий вопрос от
Thank you.
Георгия.
Next question from Georgi.
Реализовывали вы пайпы преобразования
Have you tried to realize
данных?
conversion pipes of,
можно, пожалуйста.
could you repeat it one more time?
Реализовывали вы пайпы
Have you realized
преобразования,
pipes
цепочки преобразования и
of conversion chains and
Нет, исчерпывающего ответа.
clarifying data? No.
Юрий По.
Yuri,
Рассматривали UI как дополнение,
you looked at UI
чтобы
as
строить
additional
запросы через
to
формочку. Если
a
запрос
DSL
от
language.
пользователей на запросы через UI планируете ли так
Are there any queries from users through UI? Are you planning to do that way?
Еще раз, пожалуйста, я не очень
Well,
понял.
please, one more time. I didn't quite get it.
Я думаю, здесь можно сократить до... Вы планируете прикрутить
Are you
UI
planning
какую-то, чтобы через нее писать все?
To use UI.
Просто он в виде
We have UI,
данных
but
получает,
it's in
информацию от пользователя.
the view of lines.
Ну,
It's
то есть
just text
попросили, то и
from the
сделали
user.
в UI, в общем-то.
So it's kind of what you asked for, we did in UI. Yes, exactly.
Петр Сыромолотов.
Peter Smirnov asks, the list of supported languages,
То, что оно умеет
It's-
парсить или список, из какого языка можно вызывать.
the language that can be parsed and from what language you can call it from. This list of 10 languages
Здесь имеется в виду
that
целевой язык.
NTLR supports. And here talking about the target
Вы
language.
пишете свою грамматику в виде вот
You are
такого
writing your
набора
grammar
и потом
as
NTLR
the list of
генерирует
these
на
rules, and then
выборе
NTLR generates
лексера, парсера, всю вот эту инфраструктуру,
code for Lexer and parser,
Dart
all
и
the
так далее,
infrastructure,
по списку.
and all the other things according to the list.
Так, ну, я тут некоторые вопросы пропускал, потому что они были
I'm skipping some of the questions because they were
слушатели. Я к ним
from
вернусь.
these same viewers.
От Алексея Васильчук вопрос. Экранирование спецсимволов поддерживается?
Screening special symbols. Do you support that? No.
Поддерживается, ладно.
No.
Антон Золотухин, почему выбрали в качестве оператора сравнения?
Why did you choose as a comparison operator this, one symbol equal symbol and not the double one?
Символов меньше.
Окей.
Кстати, мне уже напоминает вопросы некий блиц такой, да? Интересно.
So the remind me should be like a
И выбрал другое что-то.
quick questioning and answering.
Шуточный ответ, как преимущество.
Well, I'd say that's more like a joke, so you don't get any advantage from either one.
Окей, ну,
That's just what we did.
имелось в виду, что если
Maybe they meant
что вот
that if you have some experience,
используется двойное, чтобы было привычно, я
in some languages they use
вопрос.
double
Вопрос слушателя Эль.
equal mark.
Если язык имеет SQL-like синтаксис и в конечном итоге получается SQL, можно ли было
If you get SQLized syntaxes and as a result you get SQL, could you avoid building the tree and translate SQL directly?
Непосредственно наш язык изолирован от структуры данных.
Our language is isolated from the
Давайте как раз
data structure, and we didn't want to give the user information about the structure
запросы.
and to make them write SQL.
Может быть, это можно было как-то сделать, но
In principle, we could have done that,
спрашивают, но мы не видели
what they ask,
никакого смысла.
but we didn't see any point in that.
Это изолированное применение. То есть,
We have a sort of isolated application, work with the language and work with the database. It's just two different stages.
Тимур Черных?
Thank you.
Почему
Тимур
именно
Черных asks,
ANTLR?
why
Обусловлено
ANTLR?
поддержкой .NET?
Is it because it's supported by .NET? Not only. And I answered a similar question. We had a competency in our company in our neighboring departments. And if something goes wrong, we had somebody to go to and address the problem.
Антон.
Thank you. Anton
Прошу прощения, нет.
asks,
Виктор Ковальчук.
sorry, Viktor Kovalchuk asks,
защита от SQL?
is there any additional protection from SQL injections?
На администратора системы он не должен.
So we here orient on administrator of the system, so he's not supposed to break it. So and if even somebody got to the system, to its interface, so then everything is bad already.
Ну, может быть, как пожелание на будущее можно.
Maybe like
Петр Сыромолотов.
wish for the future. Pyotr Saromolotov asks,
Это возможно.
another requirement for the language.
Complete.
It's a possibility to create subcomplete.
Есть ли у вас?
Do you
Код комплит.
Code completion?
Да.
subcompletion you're talking about? Okay.
Нет. Ну, такая
We don't have it,
естественно,
but
присутствует. Просто
this capability
не было
exists.
вопроса на этом.
But again, there was no
Петр
requirement
Сыромолотов.
for that.
Нитро не
Another question. Did you look at Nitro?
Нет, не рассматривали.
No, we didn't consider it.
На самом деле, тут спрашивают про аналоги. Аналоги есть. Аналоги
When you're asking about similar solutions, yes, they do exist. Depending on the requirements you have, you can look at different variants and you can use whatever you need. So in some places it can be an overkill what we did. So it's all valid. It's all valid
Так, ну, пока
comments.
что вопросы закончились.
Ваня,
So I'm out of questions.
закончились, да?
Да.
Okay.
Из всего этого великого множества я хотел еще один
Out of all
добавить
this
сверху, так сказать, вишенкой
pile
своей.
of questions, and I would like to add
Мне кажется, вот когда есть
of my own.
история про написание чего-то своего, особенно
When there is a story about writing something of your own, and when I watch interviews with some people like Eric Lippman
ребята, которые
from Microsoft,
C-Sharp,
who were writing .NET
и много
and C Sharp and Pux and others, they say oftentimes,
это, и написать свой язык.
man does this, this and that, and write a language.
Пожалуйста, у вас вот это было, то есть вот как
Did you have that?
интересно, это вообще валидно делать, потому что
So as a task, is it interesting? Is it valid to do? So,
или акку или что-то еще, да, для конкретной задачи. Но вот для внутреннего
when you
роста это же полезная
do
задача.
something for a particular task, it's okay, but for kind of your inner growth, it's useful, right? So yes, I think it was quite useful. We expanded our competencies, we tried different approaches, and actually I recommend everyone should try it.
Вань, а у тебя есть цифра вопросов? Сколько вопросов пришло?
Do you have any more questions? No, I don't. No, a couple of questions came. Yes.
Алексей Артемов.
Alexey Artyomov asks,
поля у объекта, информация о
if an object has some sort of fields
которых пользователь не должен получать, как
fields that information from which the user is not supposed to receive, how you filter this data? No, there are no such fields. We are not trying to protect ourselves from our system administrator. So everything that exists in the model of data, they can use. Konstantinka, do you support type of data that is different from the practical representation of data?
Не совсем понятно, о чем речь.
I don't quite understand what you're talking about.
Вопрос хороший, но не очень понятный.
The question is good, but not quite clear.
Может быть, имеется в виду, что какие-то внутренние...
Maybe what they mean, maybe some internal in DSL, you have some types,
Что-то еще из них может...
and inside, for the users of this system and this type of object, this is a line.
Int, GUID и прочие другие системные типы.
It's not other types, it's the types of our model. If they have complex structure, they have many internal fields. So the idea was to highlight our domain objects. The objects, they have a type of a domain model.